Hey guys, Devin here from Curls and Cosplay, and today we're going to be showing you how we made our Mandalorian inspired Beskad Dagger for our Mandalorian merch cosplay. We're going to be throughout the video sharing tips and tricks on how we made this so you can use those to make your own, personalize it, and hopefully create something awesome. Now the first thing we're going to do for this project is we're going to print out and cut out our Beskad Dagger template. We created this for you, and you can find the link in the description below. We're going to take our X-Acto knife, and to save money on blades, I use a sharpener a lot. So you'll see me using that a lot in the video, especially during the foam. Now that our knives are sharpened and ready to use, we're going to take our metal ruler for all these straight lines that are on the template. Using a metal ruler, make sure that you can cut it easier and more accurately without having to worry about going over or losing the shape of the entire piece. Once everything's cut out, we can start assembling the template so that we can do solid pieces instead of trying to put together a bunch of 8.5 by 11 shards of a knife. What I like to do is line up my edges and then use the dotted line included in the template to align the two parts, and then from there you're going to tape down the edges and just wrap around the outside so that everything stays together and solid for when you outline and cut your solid foam piece. And then right there we got everything taped together, and we'll have one solid template to use on our 10mm foam. Now when it comes to pieces that are supposed to be rounded on the edges, I like to cut them at either a 90° or whatever degree needed for that point, and then later on when we pull out our Dremel, you'll see we're going to round those edges and make everything fit flush. Now we're going to start transferring our pattern over to foam. When I ordered my foam from TNT Cosplay, they sent me this awesome little pen, which is great for it, but you can also use chalk pens, Sharpies, regular pens, whatever works best for you. And then once we get that all set, we can start taking our pen and marking out around the outside of our pattern. I like to slightly overlay from foam onto the paper so that I get a nice clean line for where I'm supposed to cut once it's time to do so. You can see that clean line right here underneath my pattern. So now that I got my pattern all set up, you can see there's a clean line on one side, and I like to draw little arrows sometimes just so I remember which line I need to be cutting along. So now finally I'm going to be cutting out the foam. I first am going to sharpen my blade so that everything goes smoothly and I don't have any weird bunching. Next I'm going to set up where I want to be and then put my blade in the foam at a 90° angle, making sure I keep it straight up while I cut through the foam for the best line possible. And there you go. Now I'm going to turn my foam and we're going to do the same thing all the way around until we finish cutting out our pieces. Now for this part of the foam, I like to pull out my X-Acto knife so that I can get a more precise cut on the inside of the prop. I like to take my blade and push it towards these little corners that we have here so that I can cut into them without over-cutting. You can see I can push it in, and we can just wiggle it until we get to those corners where they'll meet, and we'll end up with preferably a nice clean cut. You can see here, now that I've got the middle areas cut out on these lines, I can just slowly edge it into the corner, give it a little wiggle to cut it without getting that overcut. Now this right here is the perfect example of why you want to have a clean and sharp blade. The one on the right, I didn't sharpen it for a while and I thought it'd be easier. And the one on the left was a more recently sharpened, and you can see how clean that edge is in comparison. Now when working with big, long, straight lines like this, I really like to use my metal ruler to make sure that it's nice and straight as I go down the back of the blade. As much as I'd like to think I have super straight lines and non-shaky hands, this is definitely not the case, especially with the amount of Rockstar I drink while doing these projects. Now we can move on from the blade and start working on the piece of the middle of the knife that's going to be going down into the handle. Again, I'm going to take that metal ruler, line it up with my line, so I can make sure it's nice and straight and smooth, so I don't get ugly wavy lines or annoying jittery cuts. Now that we got our main body cut out, we're going to add a couple of fun little details with 2mm foam on top of everything, and add a little bit of personality and customization through all these fun little areas on the top here. Also, coming back to the handle pieces, I went ahead and took my marker and put little dots on the corners that I'm going to need to round over, so that later on when we're putting everything together, we remember what needs to be rounded and which side needs to be on the bottom. Alright, now that we've got our little 2mm foam detailed piece on top of our 10mm foam, you can see I made a couple of shallow cuts on the top of the foam, not going all the way through, so then when we hit that with our heat gun later, it's going to bring out those seams. I also like to, before I go to the bench to start gluing things, I like to make sure that my blade is going to be outlined, because I'm going to be cutting that at an angle later on, and I want to make sure it lines up on both sides so that it doesn't look too wanky and off to a different area. Now, of course, with everything, I'm going to make sure that if I do it on one side, I'm going to do it on the other side so that everything stays symmetrical and clean, unless, of course, that's something that you're aiming for with an asymmetrical design. Now I want an interesting wooden pattern for my handles, so I use my X-Acto knife to chop up this little extra spare block of foam, and then I'm going to hit it with the heat gun to open up all of the seams. And I really like how this texture came out. I think it's pretty neat, looks a little bit alien, and I think it'll fit nicely with the Beskad Dagger. Now the last thing we're going to do before we head outside is, a lot of times your foam, especially even 10mm foam, is wiggly and wobbly and floppy. So we're going to add a spine into the back of our blade. So I went ahead and made a little channel on the inside of the blade and cut off about 1/4 to 1/2 inch off the back, so I could insert some bendable wiring, nice thick gauge, so that when we glue that all back on together outside, it's going to be less wobbly and hold together a lot better. So now that we're outside, the first thing we're going to do is put together that spine. I'm going to be taking my contact cement, putting it on both sides, and adding in the wire. This stuff is ooey gooey and stretchy, so we highly don't recommend getting like on your face, in your eyes, on your hands. Do it in a well ventilated area. So from here we're going to do one side with the contact cement, brushing it on to make sure it does full coverage from edge to edge. You really want this foam to stick together. We're also wanting to make sure to get some of that contact cement deep inside the channel so that it'll hold the wiring a little bit as well when we're putting everything together. Alright, now that that's drying, we're going to take our little back cover piece and we're going to start applying contact cement to that as well. Just like the other one, we're going to want to go from edge to edge and try to get full coverage on that contact surface that's going to be adhering to the rest of the knife. Now usually you wait for this to dry until it feels tacky and sticky but isn't wet. Now here in Arizona where it's 90 something degrees all the time, I have a much shorter wait time on all of my contact cement, so just make sure that you're letting it dry properly before you start sticking the pieces together. Now we're going to take our foam and we're going to be carefully pressing that gauged wire into the channel that we had cut and beveled out earlier. Once we have that wire and everything pressed in, we can start taking our stop sheet, lining it up to where it's going to sit on the top and start slowly pressing it in down over the top of the wire. Once everything is pressed and adhered, you can see we got a whole lot less flop to our knife while still keeping it con safe. Real quick, we're just going to take our Dremel and our grinding bit and we're going to smooth down some of these corners that are going to be adhering to other pieces. Now we can start working on putting the pieces together. I'm going to place my 2mm foam where I'm going to want it to go, and I'm going to mark it off so that I can avoid using too much glue or rubbing glue on areas where it's not needed. Next, I'm going to use my favorite tool, the lint roller. Now if you have dogs like I do, you'll find that dog hair gets everywhere, including on foam parts. So we're going to get all the excess foam specks, dog hair, leaves, whatever you got, and we're going to take those off our foam so when we glue them, there's not going to be any weird bumps or smooth areas that are inside of the glue. Now here I put some masking tape down on the opposite side of my 2mm foam to stop from brushing over all over my table, as well as to use, an extra strip of double-sided tape or just folded over masking tape to keep it attached to the table while you're brushing, so you don't have to worry about holding it or dealing with it flopping all over the table. Now, just like earlier, we're going to make sure to take our consommate and take it from edge to edge. We want absolute full coverage, especially on big flat areas like this. This will make sure that both pieces adhere the best together without any cracks or peeling coming from the outer edge of your prop. Now that all the glue is on, we can feel that the quick dry of the Arizona sun is causing these to get nice and tacky really quick, so we can work quickly with putting together our props. We'll now just line it up and get them stuck together. And there you go. Now once I've got them flattened and placed together, I'm going to start going through and removing the masking tape slowly to make sure it doesn't peel off any glue or, God forbid, any of the foam on the outside. And just like that, we got some fun detailing and a little bit of personality to our prop that it wouldn't have had if we had just kept it flat. Now we're just going to take our contact cement and we're going to start constructing the crossguard for our blade. This is pretty straightforward. You're going to stick each end and you're going to stick it on, making sure to fit the pattern and place it in the way you want it to look. You can really personalize this knife in all sorts of different ways, and the crossguard is just one of the ways you can do it. You don't have to follow this tutorial or the template perfectly. Let your creativity roll out and have some fun with it. Now that the glue is dried on these pieces, we're going to go ahead and start sticking them together. Now, for the way I've designed my crossguard, I want one end to go down while the other will go up. So I want to make sure that I have them placed properly and lined up on those edges the best I can, so that it'll be minimal work later on with the Dremel tool. Now before I get too far ahead of myself, I want to make sure that since I'm wearing this on my left hip, that the blade as well as the crossguard are going to sit properly in the scabbard. So I make sure that everything's going to be lined up, pulled out properly, before I look at the way that it's going to fit over the end of our blade piece. Now that I've got it where I want it, I'm going to mark it off so I know where to put my glue. Now see me work pretty quickly with placing the glue in this area because I want it to be a tiny bit wet when I get it on there to make sure that it'll slide all the way up to the bottom of the blade. So I quickly put glue around the edge where I made my mark, as well as inside the crossguard. Then I'm going to quickly place it where it needs to go. Once again, looking at my scabbard to see how it needs to be placed. And then we'll be good to go with that piece. And there you go. Now that that's all glued in and placed, we can move on to working with the handle pieces. I'm going to take two pieces and sort of line them up to the edge where I'm going to need them. Now you can see there's going to be a little bit of a gap around the edge, as well as a little bit at the end. So I'm going to come in with my contact cement and I'm going to start gluing down my handles to the center area. And once all my pieces are glued and ready to go, I'm going to put them in place right where I want them to be and give them a good squeeze to make sure they stay. You can see I have a little bit extra on the end where it cut a little bit long. So we're just going to take our box cutter and whoop, slice that piece right off the end so it sits flush. Alright, now it's time to fill the gaps. So I'm going to take the 10mm long piece I had cut out from my extra foam. I'm going to place that right inside so I can see how long it needs to be with it wrap around. Once I got my piece in place, you can see I just cut off the excess so it would line up with the rest of the handle, and then add in the glued piece on the back side as well, making sure to pull apart the foam and move it out of the way so it doesn't get stuck before you're able to press it in where you need it to. And with that, the base construction of our Beskad Dagger is finished. Now it's time to start working on the edge of our blade. We're going to need to be cutting this whole thing at a nice angle to sort of meet in the middle of the foam. I'm going to first make sure that my knife is as sharp as possible, because we're definitely going to need it to be real sharp so that we can cut along the outside of this edge. Now, unlike the first time we made this knife, I want it to look really used, chipped, beaten, really torn up. I don't want this edge to be perfect. That being said, if you really do want a nice clean edge for your blade, I highly suggest leaving a small flat area where the edge of the blade would be, where you can round it out and make it look super symmetrical and even. That way you'll avoid the chipping and distressed look that I'm going for. You'll also find that if you have a belt sander, that is so unbelievably perfect for sharpening blades, and you can get a really nice, even looking blade edge using it. Unfortunately, I don't have one, so we're going to do our best with a Dremel. And there you go. We got it all chopped off, took that chunky edge off, and now you can see my edge is beaten and gross, and we're going to come in, we're going to clean it up more than this using our Dremel. Alright, so now we've taken our Dremel to our edge, and I also went ahead and made a couple little nicks and scratches using the sanding drum while I was at it. Now I made sure to make this look chunky using a couple different kinds of Dremel bits to get different sort of patterns and textures in your foam. I find it best to experiment and see what sort of thing works best for the kind of, aesthetic you're going for. Finally, we want to hit it with our heat gun to seal up the foam. This gets rid of all the little extra fuzzies or dust or other things that might have happened during dremeling. It also opens up all those small seams we made earlier, and you can see them start to open up on the side of the blade, and they add those little extra details that really makes it look cool, especially once you get the paint on. Now, just because I hate myself, I like to go through and do extra sanding afterwards and do some light little edge rounding on a lot of the different areas using my stone sanding bit. This doesn't take away too much foam, but does a really good job of adding just the most subtle rounding to places like the back of the knife. And now we can move on to our handle. We're going to be taking off a lot more foam than we were on the blade. So I'm going to use my regular sanding drum and just take off excess bits that stick out too far and get everything flush and smoothed out. And just like that, I have my handle nice and shaped to where I want it to be. Now, one thing we're going to end up doing is we're going to want to heat seal everything one more time because we did take the Dremel to all of those edges. This will make it just all of that more clean and good looking once we add on our Plasti Dip and our paint. Now, one thing I really like to do with my handles is, now that all the wood has been pulled out by the heat gun and it's still nice and warm, I like to give it a little bit of a squeeze. Now, doing this will shape the foam a little bit to the curves of your hand and make it a really comfortable grip. Now, it's important to keep in mind when using your heat gun not to get too close or to stay in one spot for too long, because you can cause burns and bubbles, and honestly, burnt foam does not smell good. Well, I'd say at this point we're all together, we're fully built, and we're ready to whip out some sealing with our good friend Plasti Dip. Now, make sure when you're using any sort of spray sealant, you're doing it outside or in a really well ventilated area, because this stuff is smelly. Also, I highly suggest getting this spray can holder. It's a universal spray cannon for any sort of spray material, from Plasti Dip to spray paint, so you can hold it nicely and go back and forth. It costs like $2. A good idea to make sure to follow the directions to do full shaking on your can, as well as, if you're able to, put it in a little bit of warm water for 10-15 minutes and it'll make the sprays coming out of there all the more detailed and fine, so you get a cleaner spray over the top of your props. Now we're going to take our can, we're going to spray in back and forth motions about 10 inches away from our prop until we have lightly dusted it in plastic dip. I like to do 1 to 2 layers of light dusting and 2 heavy dustings of plastic dip to get a really good coverage on all of my props. Alright, we fully sealed our Beskad Dagger with about 3 to 4 layers of plastic dip is where you're going to find that nice sweet spot. And now we're going to use this super high-tech spray booth to paint. Alright, so I went ahead and I taped off the area that I don't want to be sprayed right now. We're going to paint our blade and our handle, and once we're done with that, we're going to go in and do our crossguard. Now I like to use my airbrush just because it's faster and you don't have brush strokes in any of your props. So we're going to start off with the basic silver paint. This is the metallic silver spray. Now, once the blade's all painted, I can flip it over, switch my color, and start working on the handle. Now, because I am painting multiple things at once, I don't have to worry about fully cleaning my brush between every single use. Instead, I pull out a cleaning pot and just rinse out the last color and make sure it's all pushed out before I add in the new paint. Now, when I'm done fully painting, this will get a full dry, wash, and scrub down to make sure that no paints are staying and clogging up inside my airbrush. Now that all that silver is cleaned out, we're going to take our wood brown airbrush paint and we're just going to lay down this light brown color over the entirety of the handle. Now, because we want it to look wooden, we're also going to take this dark brown and just taking some small strokes, we're just going to spray that in along the grain of our handle. And that's going to add a little bit of texture and a little bit of a nicer wooden look to the overall feel of it. Now that that's all done and dried off, I'm going to tape off my handle and my blade so that I can go in real quick with my copper and start painting the crossguard. Now that that paint's all nice and dry, we can go into my absolute favorite part of any cosplay, the weathering. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add some water to some black paint and we're going to make what's called a wash. Once that's all mixed together and good to go, we're just gonna take it straight off of our plate, palette, bowl, whatever you need to use, and we're just gonna slap it on. Now while you're doing this, you really want to press into crevices where dirt and grime could really get stuck on a practical object. You do not have to be gentle, you do not have to put on light coats, because we're just going to take our towel, and you can use paper towel, whatever you need, and we're just going to start dotting off the excess paint. And you can see as we go about doing this, it leaves down just enough behind to fill in those little cracks and crevices and make the overall blade look dirty. Alright, now that our base layer of dirt is over our entire blade, I'm going to take my silver brush and we're going to start adding in a little bit of chipping, flecking, and scratching to make it look like it's really been coming in and out and it's been used regularly. To this, I'm just going to pat out just barely any silver on the edge of my blade, and then at about a 90-degree angle, keeping the brush flat, I'm going to start pulling around the edges, and you can see how it leaves just a thin line of silver. Now when you're doing this, if you want it to be more realistic, especially if you're doing it on guns, things like that, you can use a silver Sharpie, or you can just try to make smaller scratches on everything. I like to exaggerate stuff, so I put big scratches and a lot of deterioration on the edges of my weapons. Not necessarily because it's realistic or necessary, but because I think it looks really cool. And there you go, guys, we made a scratched up, grimed up Beskad Dagger. This will be an awesome addition to any sort of Mandalorian or Star Wars cosplay going into cons now that everything's opening back up. You can see our first shot at it. A little less personality, but it looks good nonetheless. So have a lot of fun with it. Experiment, wrap things in leather, add different details, really make something cool for yourself. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you learned something, hopefully you got to make something cool. If you have any questions, we can always do the comments below. If you love this video, like, comment, and subscribe so we can make more cool content for you and we can keep making cool props for us. Thanks, and we'll see you in the next video.